heavily invested in, along with plant-rich diet. So a lot of things happening on the tech space. We have a group digital officer, we have a group innovation officer, and there's a lot of teams and solutions and resources, including SODEXO Ventures, created to look at certain AI.
The fabric and infrastructure that allows us and enables us to develop these technologies that reach out to both the food tech industry and agri-tech. Junwei?
Hi, Junwei from Alibaba Cloud. I just saw my colleague Ziyuan over there. So it's a bit strange for me to be here. I'm not a agriculture expert, but thanks to Isabel for inviting us. What I am is, of course, I clearly eat a lot, so I like my food. I also like to talk a lot about technology and how it applies to traditional domains. So when you think about traditional domains, I guess agriculture is one of the most traditional ones, right? So it's been there since we stopped hunting and started farming, right? So from this Alibaba Cloud's perspective, I actually am part of a team of people called data technology consultants. So what we do is basically we have helping our clients to go through a process. Basically right now it's become a big word called digital transformation. But how do we get started with digital transformation and what areas we should be looking at? So this is where I come in to help our customers identify areas that can have immediate impact to their business. So if you have any questions you would like to ask me, we can talk about that. I would also like to share a bit more about what we do in what we call the ET agriculture brain, which I think we'll share more later.
Okay, yeah. Excellent. And finally, we've got Chung Min over here. One of the challenges when you get into deep technology in any industry is the moral debates on technology, the legal aspects and the regulatory aspects, right? And what I like is Chung Min kind of talk about some of the areas that we often look at IP. We also look at patents, et cetera. So these are very much a significant part of the ecosystem when you're in deep technology.
Hi everyone, my name is Kwan Chung Ming. I'm a patent attorney from the law firm Yusan Audrey in Singapore. We are a firm of about 20 years and I've been in this space for about 12 years. And in my work, I typically would help clients identify and protect their inventions. And one of the things that I often hear is that clients would come to me and they say they want to protect their AI, the AI engine itself. And most of the time I would need to try to convince them that the AI engine, you might want to keep it as confidential information and trade secret, but you might want to protect its application. So that's some parts of the intellectual property protection which we encounter day to day. Now, with regards to regulatory and sensitive information, well, the deployment of AI engine typically would generate data, and either the data that you use for feeding into the AI engine or data produced by the AI engine itself, and those data could create a lot of legal issues, and we typically advise on that as well. Who does the data belongs to, and who is authorized to use the data? Can you transfer the data out of a particular jurisdictions, for example? So these are the things that we do as well. Now, our firm does a holistic IP approach in the sense that we protect intellectual property, not just limited to patents and trade secrets, but also trademarks, copyright, and other forms of IP as well. Copyright might be important in the AI context as well. So we do work from the beginning up to enforcement of IP and exploitation of IP as well. So I look forward to discuss the different issues with you and any questions that you might have with regards to protection of your invention. Thank you.
Thank you. So I just want to put this all in context, why agriculture and food tech. So pretty much international organizations, FAO, WWF, et cetera, there is general consensus in the next 31 years, we have to produce as much as humankind has consumed in the last 8,000 years. It's an extremely important endeavor that it doesn't matter what other technologies we get into, et cetera, if we don't have food, basic food, it's going to have a significant impact. So I'd like to, as a courtesy, I'd like to start off with Isabel with a basic question. I'm going to be asking each of the panelists 3 questions. As these questions go, I'd like you to log in if you'd like to propose some questions, and I can ask your questions later in the event. So, Isabel, articulate the importance of food security and sustainability. Why have you developed your solutions and your approaches in collaboration with Alibaba Cloud and Bueller, who's may be represented here?
The answer is very simple. It's a matter of talent crunch. It's a matter of thinking forward and preparing for the future and getting the good brains, the good talents in that space. So let me elaborate. We started this platform and we started our activity believing that technology can really help address systemic challenges in the food and agriculture chain. We also look at Asia as being the nexus between high growth and high stakes. We managed to grow a very substantial pool of activity and grow a community on the back of it, just being the advocates of technology in this sector. But then we realized that it becomes a closed community and we need to be more inclusive. If we want to make sure the next generations embrace this challenge, we definitely need to talk to more than just third-generation farmers. I mean, there are people who don't really know about cows and livestock. They know about food because everybody is eating, but they might not just dream about working in the food industry. There is this kind of thinking that, sorry, I hope I won't be offending anybody, but if you've done super, super good studies, will you go for a job in the food industry? I mean, these are not the top-notch jobs in many people's opinion. So we wanted to kind of reverse the onus and show that if you match deep tech with this sector, which, by the way, really needs it, you give life to a different kind of jobs. So how we looked at it? Future Food Asia was in year 3. It was not a matter of repeating what had been done in year 1 and 2. We felt like we need to bring new folks in that perimeter. How can we do this? We need to talk the language of people we want to attract. They love AI, they love deep tech, they love tech. Let's play by these rules. And so we crafted with Alibaba Cloud the first artificial intelligence challenge based on a real industry problem provided by our corporate partner, who is a company called Bueller. So if you don't know Bueller, it's very normal, but just be aware that they are behind the majority of processed food in the world. They're doing the machines behind all this. It's a very respected Swiss company. And we have a very, very fun collaboration between one of the oldest Swiss company in that space and one of the most recent company in the domain of AI. The basic idea is the idea of crowd intelligence, and I will leave it to you to elaborate on this. You will do it much better. This is the idea that if you provide a very substantial problem statement provided by an industry leader, and you leave it to data scientists to use their brain power, their expertise, their know-how, and their AI capabilities, you might find very interesting solutions. But here is where all the other competencies kicks in, IP, domain knowledge, because as much as you can be very bright in mathematics, you can be the rock star in finding the way to get the algorithm converge more quickly. You can be super, super strong at this. At some point of time, you need to use your discernment to tell, yeah, sounds like we're in a good direction, or no, we are completely off track. So in a nutshell, we wanted to make sure, in addition to encouraging entrepreneurs like Tanmay to provide solutions to farmers, to people for a better food future, we would also talk the language of people who, at the moment, don't have a lot of bandwidth for our sector, but eventually their expertise is very much needed. maybe you want to comment on the crowd intelligence platform.
Yeah, so this is what in Alibaba Cloud we have a platform called Tianchi. So it's quite similar to if you're familiar with Kaggle. So it's something like our version of Kaggle, but we do also have our suite of products and of course our experts that are supporting these projects. Yeah. So from that perspective, what we are trying to do is actually excite the data scientists who may, as of now, not be thinking about agriculture, the food tech as a domain, but as Isabel mentioned, it could be something that's interesting to them in the future. So it's how do we condense the problem into something that is familiar to data scientists. So I think this is the part where there's a lot of synergy between the both of us, right? So she speaks the agriculture tech portion. For us, we are more in the data science, the AI space, right? So that partnership, I think you can find that, I think it's publicly available. The challenge will be publicly available, and if you're interested to work on that challenge, you could find that on our TNC.
Which means to go straight to the point, if any of yours want to apply, it's online.
Yeah.
Now, at this point, I resonate this because just to give you a background on the practical experiential side of it, my company is an artificial intelligence company. We've done over 128 use cases across 15 verticals. We've done fintech, credit scoring for banks, trading systems for hedge funds, insurance tech, medical imaging, a ton of them. 2 years ago, I made the decision to pivot my company from all of these different solutions that I give across different industries. I only focus on one industry right now, agriculture. Why? Because we don't have time. We have such little time to solve this problem about food security and sustainability. A big part of that capability to do it is the infrastructure providers like Alibaba, because this is how we accelerate our capability to do AI. We can't do it and wait for academia to catch up. We can't wait for the talent pool to learn data science to do it and stuff like that. We need solutions now. And it's not like we have time or luxury of, oh, another year. Another year is 1/30 of the time that we have before we get to a point where, what's the statistics, 70% of the world won't have food. That's in 30 years, right? So it's very critical for me. But on that, let me switch over here and talk to Tanmay about a good example of how these initiatives are trying to find solutions for sustainable intensification, which means try to increase yield without eroding on our environment and our planet. Tanmay?
So there are two parts to this. So you mentioned yield intensification, right? So this is an area which we don't touch upon, but I'd be happy to speak about it. So this is more at the farm level, how to empower a farmer to increase his yield, right? Because we only have so much resources, so much land, so much water, and inputs. Inputs cost money. So given all these resources, how to maximize the yield? So these days, a lot of deep tech startups are doing a lot of stuff across the globe, especially in the US and Israel, enabling the farmer with information on what inputs to use, given soil conditions and then other factors, farm-related factors. After sowing, how to efficiently operate the farm with all the information. So Perez's company is doing remote sensing, I believe. So using satellite data, using drone imagery, using drone data. Combine that with farm level data such as soil type, moisture levels, nutrient levels. All this information can be captured using sensors, farm level sensors. So these are different data points that go into models that startups, deep tech startups, use to provide valuable information to the farmers on how to operate the farm, how much water to give, where to give, what inputs to give, where to give, when to harvest, and how to harvest. Talking about, let's go back to data points. So as I said, there are multiple layers of data points. So there's one layer at the very macro level where we use satellite imagery. There are different types of satellite imagery, and maybe Perez can talk more about it. And then coming further down, you have drone images. Drone images can be captured at plantation level, at sub-farm level, and those can be used alongside geotagging, and that's where the traceability aspect comes in. And you combine that with a very micro layer of input data. So at the very specific plant level, how is the fruit doing, if there's any infestation on the fruit, where it is as far as harvestability goes. So this is very empowering for a farmer, and this was not there 5 or 6 years ago. And this helps in yield intensification if I'm touching upon it in the right manner.
And on this, that's on the yield, just creating more food, right? Then we have the other side of the balance, which is sustainability. And what I'd like to explore here and inform the audience is how are enterprise such as SODEXO implementing technology or deep technology or innovation in order to develop and maintain sustainable business practices?
Let me talk about the complexity first, and then looking at solutions. There's a challenge, and the challenge is huge when it comes to food traceability and food transparency. It's very complex, it's very fragmented. If you are in the food business, you would understand there are at least 5 to 8 different stages before food even reaches the consumer, from the farm, before that even the feed. If you take cattle, for example, the slaughterhouses, the processing, the manufacturing, to distributors, to retailers or business, and then to the consumer. In every stage of this, there's a lot of data. There's an overwhelming amount of data that exists. And if the consumers want to have access to the data or not, and how much of the data do they need to get access to before they become bored or they became, can't find the right word, mute or to those questions. So if you look at least the feed, where's the feed coming from? Is the feed organic? Is the feed sustainable? Is the feed coming from Brazil, or is it shipped to, if it's soy, is it shipped from China? Or if you look at the slaughter, or if you look at the cattle itself, what drugs are being fed into those cattle? Are there antibiotic use? Is there routine use of antibiotics? Are there growth hormones going into those? Are they secure from an animal welfare standpoint? If you look at a topic like hens or egg-laying hens, are they cage-free eggs? So what happens in that facility, and what are the labor conditions that go into, plus the environmental conditions that go into those facilities, and then following it up with the cold chain process till the time it reaches the consumer. So there's a lot of information in there. Is there a need downstream at the consumer side to look at all this information? And what is complete traceability? Or is there a need for complete verification, which is impossible based on the situations historically and up until now? Because if you look at seafood in the US, for example, in the US, only 2% of the seafood in the US has actually been inspected. Okay? So the rest, you do not know, people do not even know what they're eating. So unless a scandal happens, nobody knows what is going into that. As was the case, for example, when the horse meat scandal hit Europe in 2013, where horse meat was unintendedly or intentionally mixed with beef and was sold as beef. So horse being a sports horse, there's a different type of drugs that goes into them as compared to the food-related animals, where you're not supposed to put those hormones. So unless something goes wrong in a company or within the industry, nobody spends the time, the resource, the money to look into it, because it's insanely expensive to go through that if you go through the historical process. And once again, who is going to pay for this increase? Okay, because if you look at from a plate itself, from a consumer plate itself, everything in the plate is becoming more and more expensive, because people want fair trade coffee or fair trade produce, or people want cage-free eggs, so that comes at 3 times more expensive. If you look at palm oil, there's a need for certified sustainable palm oil. That has a cost to it. If there is, from an animal protein standpoint, no growth hormones, no antibiotics, there's a cost to it. and pesticide-free fruit and vegetables, Marine Stewardship Council certified fish. So there's a cost. The plate itself is coming increasingly more expensive if a consumer wants everything sustainable. And to add to it, the cost of transparency or traceability that comes in. So even though consumers, and this is the key part, even though consumers are saying today they are willing to pay more and more for a sustainable good or service, is the willingness to pay more translating into the actual payment when they are in front of the retail and buying those items? Or is it more a survey response saying they want to feel good? Because there's not enough study done between the willingness to pay and the actual payment. But what is important is the trend is there. Okay? What was 55% in Nielsen survey a few years back has been at 66%. So more and more consumers are saying they're willing to pay. At some point in time, they will start paying. Another way to look at this, and this is the more fundamental way to look at it, is food rightly priced? For all the value that food is giving to us in the world today, is food at the right price? To us, it's one of the most undervalued resources in the world today.
Thank you. I think that we're kind of shifting our discussions, and I think we can make this pretty exciting by throwing in some very controversial topics, which I'm going to try to attempt to do so you don't, fall asleep in boredom here, right? On these big macros, right? And this one's for Chung Min, and it's just building on this idea over here about, he already addressed, scratch the surface on artificial intelligence and IP and those challenges. But the question that I have on that is, for example, as we're discussing about the food value chain, what are the liabilities or, what needs to be disclosed on IP, if you're consuming, do you really want to know where this is coming from? I'll give you an example. Average farmer with 1/2 hectare of land in Myanmar with a family of 5 makes $200 per year annual. That's it, 200. I don't know, it's a pair of shoes, right? You think about it, right? Now, you're looking at the cost of food, et cetera. And so how does it get that bowl of rice is X over wherever, right? But then we have the other side of it, right, on the IP, and because he's an IP specialist. Is it okay for us that we're doing technology, that we lock down our technology, we patent it, we do our trade secrets, et cetera, so that we can profit on it? And this is a very interesting topic if you guys are interested in the GMO model and things like this, right? What are your thoughts on that, Chung Min? I mean, because what we're doing here is protecting, it's a balance, right? We're always talking about what's the balance to protect my IP for my commercialization versus you getting access to food at a price that you can afford. I thought that'd be an interesting one to crack open here.
Okay. Well, first of all, I must say Drew has deviated from the script, so I need some time to respond. But going through my mind right now is, well, if you try to, of course, protect your invention, and when we talk about artificial intelligence, and if you do a patent search like what I do on a daily basis, you'll find that there are thousands of applications that people file just based on the search on artificial intelligence alone for different types of applications, not limited to food, not limited to agriculture. But if you narrow down the search to include food and agriculture, you actually find little. I just did a search yesterday, and I keyed in AI plus food as a search string. It turned up 30 results, 30. Out of these 30 results, majority are filed by Korean. They have a smart kimchi making machine that makes use of artificial intelligence to detect the level of fermentation of the kimchi. They have also a food safety pattern which talks about detection of the decay level of the food. So they deploy sensors in places like the fridge, and it's of course connected remotely to a server, and the server would do its thing to detect, to notify a user if there is some decay of food. So food safety is there. On the topic of food tracing, there is also patent applications filed in terms of supply chain, guaranteeing that you have your source, that from the source to the end, every part of the process is actually tracked, and they use artificial intelligence plus blockchain for that. So there's a lot of applications. Now, going back to, of course, the morality of it, and if we look at food itself, now food is, of course, something that exists in nature. It's bestowed to us for survivor, and nobody can claim that I patent this mango, for example, and nobody can eat the mango unless they pay me X amount of royalty. Yeah, but when we go into the patent space, I think it's not so much of patenting genetically modified food, which, it goes into that gray area that Drew was talking about, and it could get a bit complex. But really, what I found in relation to artificial intelligence and food, based on my own, search, is that there are applications on not so much of the food item itself or the modification of the food, but the surrounding conditions which makes the food palatable and consumable, and whether it's safe to consume, and whether you can guarantee some amount of quality of that. So I think that neatly, skirts away from the issue of morality, which is very difficult to answer. And but if we go down into that part, I think the laws of different countries have kind of, including patent laws in the different countries, have kind of agreed and converged to a point where anything that exists in nature itself, which includes food, and which includes, to a certain extent, some modification of that food, the substance of the food itself, is getting increasingly difficult to patent that. It's getting increasingly difficult. And I think the governments of different countries are starting to recognize that just because you do a little bit of things to modify the food doesn't mean that you'll be able to get a patent for it. Of course, along that line, last time there was I guess 10 over years ago, there was an issue about genetically modifying animals. I mean, food is one thing, right? I mean, if you talk about plants, you modify plants in itself, but when you go down into animal, it opens another can of worms. And I think laws in different countries have also been enacted to prevent that abuse of that kind of situation, and correspondingly, the IP that can be generated when you try to modify an animal is decreased as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to touch on that, and I apologize to my panel of slight deviation, but I was trying to test the audience cognizant process here on how engaged you folks are. How many people, I just want to ask, raise your hand if you can, are from a farming background? Right, so you can see it's a minority, right? I mean, we're the guys that listen to country music, have big buckles, boots. That's actually, SGInnovate knows me very well. They're surprised I'm in a suit because usually I have a big buckle and cowboy boots. But one of the challenges that I have, I'm a Singapore domiciled company, and almost all of my clients are not in Singapore. They're in large areas, Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, Brazil, et cetera. Where farming is a primary industry, New Zealand, Australia. But this question is in Junwei. In the context of Singapore, where we have different urban type farming, how does it tie in to infrastructure and providers as well as solutions? What have you seen in this space? And then tying off right from your response, I'm gonna go back to Isabel on something that she commented earlier, that, and we're starting to discover here, there's not much going on, and my question's gonna be, of your technologies, how much are you seeing in the ecosystem here in Singapore? Junwei?
So Alibaba being a Chinese company, most of my use cases would be from deployments in China. So increasingly, we have been getting more requests from the agriculture space in terms terms of helping them with the whole upgrading and digital transformation path. So we see that there are two pretty, I guess taking a leaf off his book is the plants and the animal side, right? So you handle them differently, I guess. So from the plant side of the house, we do have quite a bit of requests that are basically quite similar to Drew's, satellite images and how we can use those images to help the farmers to better understand what's going on with their plot of land, right? Which areas within that plot are better for which types of crops. Again, I think that was one of the use cases. And then we also do have seeing quite a bit of increasing use of IoT in that space, sensors that are being deployed on the ground. We do have quite a wide network coverage in China, so most of the work, the heavy lifting is still done in the cloud. So I do understand in countries like Indonesia, you do need quite a bit more edge computing type of solutions, right? So, but from our case, thankfully, it's still streaming large quantities of data to our cloud. That's where we can get our data scientists to work on those problems. So from the livestock perspective, we do have a couple of interesting projects. So I guess the more interesting one is using like audio to kind of figure out if the health of the animal is compromised in any way. So we do have a model built to recognize problems when pigs, for example, in pigs and in I think cows also. The more recent one is cows. So to identify certain sounds that would signal that the animal is unhealthy. So I guess that would be a more innovative thing for me personally. So from the other angle, the supply chain logistics management angle, we do have quite a bit of work there in terms of trying to trace and track that. Within the supply chain, there's no funny business going on within that space. So that definitely quite a lot of technologies can be applied to that. But more for Singapore, in fact, personally, I've been involved in a number of projects previously in the vertical farming space, which I see is not very widespread in most of the other countries also. So within Singapore itself, I guess the use case is also not very well defined, but personally, that's my personal view. So I guess we need to look into more technologies, I guess.
Isabel, what are you seeing in the space? What's resonating? I've got my vertical farming's one. Alternative food sources is another that we have a big with AVA, and then just recently, Singapore launched, 90 million into a food innovation lab in Kranji. But what are you seeing in the space?
Are you referring to artificial intelligence in the space?
Yeah, AI applied to agriculture, or even deep tech, general deep tech into agriculture. What are you seeing in the space?
So let me try to map the landscape very briefly. There are two main providers. When you refer to deep tech, there are two main providers of innovation in food and agri: biotechnology, IoT sensors, AI, enabled by deep learning. I make it very schematic. Don't take me to elaborate on whether deep learning is the predecessor of this and this and this. We can spend hours on this, but basically you have kind of two channels. You have biotechnology, you have sensors and AI behind this. All of them have been developed for higher purposes. I should never say this because food is a very high purpose, but they've been developed for cybersecurity, for health, which, okay, if it's a higher purpose, I don't know, but for sure you have more margin, which is very important to drive business. So eventually, this became ripe for applications in the agri space where you have nothing like the margin you have in the healthcare. Let me narrow it down to AI. We see lots of things happening. on the one side in the big corporations, on the other side in the startup side, and anywhere in the middle. You don't need to be a very big company to do AI. Let me take a very menial example, and very deliberately so. There are potato processing companies, not the big ones, not the McCains of this world, in a humble processing factory. They are using AI to better sort the diced potatoes and to reduce the food waste. That's great. And yes, there are data scientists behind. So on this end, it's creating new opportunities. Who would have said that there are data scientists working in processing of potatoes? 5 years back, everybody would have said no, of course not. They would find people in the other fancy domains, but not in this domain. The very interesting thing, if you speak with, if you look at data scientist blogs, the one where people chat very casually about their experience, they said, oh, I signed for a great job. I was supposed to do AI, and I'm doing data engineering, or even worse, I'm doing data cleaning. You will find many young chaps saying, yeah, I signed for a great job, and on the paper it was great, but eventually I'm just managing the cleaning of the mess they left behind. Why? Because before you do AI, you need to do data engineering. So there are many layers that incumbent players find sometimes very difficult, because these are decades and decades of practices to change. And this is really, I can tell you, there are so many examples. I'm sure you have these sort of examples in your company. So on the corporate side, many things are moving, but I would say the impediment is that you need to change so many things within the organization to be AI ready. And then the next big challenge is these AI projects, these AI platforms, they are collaborative in nature. And this corporation might not be really ready to embrace this collaborativeness, not that they don't want to, but you have IP issues, you have limitations of responsible liabilities and things like this. So it's not that easy for them. Flip to the side of the startups, much easier for them, starting from a clean slate. They can proudly say we are applying AI to seed breeding. We are applying AI to discovery of novel ingredients. We are applying AI to recognition of flows in a process, and so on and so forth. And very often, they do so. They are not claiming this in a random manner. But then they need funding. So if you whisper AI, high-tech, deep tech, you have a chance to catch a few investors. Honestly, they will come to you. Eventually, you pitch investors. And then they tell you, okay, you're doing AI, show me your data set. And you show 600 points. Okay. What do you want to do with 600 points? And the guy, it could be you, right? Says, yeah, but I need the funding to get 6,000 points. And the other one say, yeah, but with 6,000 points, you're not going to impress anybody. So what I'm describing in an ironical manner is the journey from the dream you are selling of a startup that will change the world or some parts of it with AI applied to XYZ, and the fact that you need to start somewhere, and before you do AI, you need to have big data. Before you have big data, you need to have data, and it takes time. But we see this absolutely bubbling.
So this is interesting. In the last year, we're starting to hear a lot about, on the venture capital side, agri-tech starting to come up. Venture capitalists that just a year and a half ago, they never even heard of it, and now they're talking about it. This question is for you, Tanmay. What do you see? Do investors believe in the stuff the madness that you and I do in agri-tech? That's one side of it. And then on the other side, and I need some empathy from the audience here, we're doing technology to a farmer and that's why I described the Myanmar farmer. How do you get them to adopt it? And they're in that world that you're dealing with. In India, I deal with it in very remote places that there's definitely no internet or no plan to put infrastructure there. How do you balance that? What are the investors? What are they thinking? Are they interested? Mm-hmm. And our end consumer of our product, benefactor of our product, is the farmer. Are they interested in it?
So talking about investors, yes, investors are interested, as long as somebody has an interest or background in the agri or food space. I don't have the numbers ready with me, but the investments globally and also regionally here, not here, sorry, globally and also if you talk specifically about US, Israel, and India, the investments in ag tech and specifically deep tech have risen. I don't know exponentially or not, but they have risen. Like the graph is quite impressive. But you need to have somebody from the agri or food background who appreciates the need and who appreciates the market. We recently got invested by two prominent VC funds. One of the funds that led the round were Omnivore Partners, they're India-based agri-specialist fund. But it took them to convince the other investor to invest in us because the other investor may or may not have appreciated the market need. Talking about farmers, it's difficult to convince the farmers. I mean, technically we can pitch and we can distribute directly to farmers, but it becomes a difficult use case, especially in developing countries in South Asia, Southeast Asia, where the farmers are marginal and the land holdings are quite small. It becomes very difficult from a business standpoint to go everywhere and distribute your product. It's very easy to scale up with the companies, with the large food companies, which can in turn give the application to the solution to farmers to use, because eventually one of our major use case lies with the farmers at the farm gate, because we are helping the farmers objectively assess the quality of their produce. But it's very difficult to convince the farmer themselves.
I definitely agree on that.
It has to come from the corporates.
Right, it comes to corporate. Now, the very interesting dynamic that we see in our industry is on the corporates, they are getting increased pressure from their buyers on traceability, what's the source of it, et cetera. So, and that is definitely your area. When I deal with food manufacturing companies, agriculture companies, et cetera, their driver is a catalyst where I'm going to lose that loan from HSBC. I'm using use cases here. Or Nestle is not going to buy my product anymore, et cetera. Or Carrefour is not going to have me on their shelves because somebody did something somewhere, upstream. Right now, what we're talking about, the challenges here is when we try to do technology to solve this problem, we also have to figure out a way whether or not it culturally aligns with the philosophy or business views. How do we address that? Your company is anchored in it, but how do you get another company to, take that same path or take that same position?
So going back to the fundamental, you are either that type of company or you're not. And if you're not that type of company, and if you're losing customers, it's a problem. So you naturally end up becoming slowly but steadily that type of a company. So I would say the biggest challenge that we face is from a cost aspect to it. But for SODEXO, it's the same as is the case for any other big industry players in the food space. Who is going to bear the cost of doing this? Because the cost is being sometimes spread across the food value chain. So I could be investing in it, but someone else is benefiting out of it and is not willing to pay me, who has invested in it, that piece of the premium because it's getting lost in there. So on one side is looking at the cost angle. The other side is looking at what are the investments that you as a large company are putting in-house. Because as Isabel mentioned earlier, all the big brains or the brilliant minds were more focused into industries that were not traditionally food, into video games and others. And we have serious world issues to address, and now we are seeing a lot of people wanting to get a share of the value if the company is demonstrating purpose. So more and more of these talents coming from deep tech are coming and joining companies like SODEXO knowing that there is a value that we have put around this topic. So now we have a chief data officer. It didn't exist a few years back. We have a group of data scientists, a group of data engineers, a group of data project owner, use case, even if that is even a naming convention. So all of this, people are coming in, but the business is still in the traditional mindset. So the talents needs to see themselves as valued in that big corporate environment. And if you don't see it valued, they don't stay longer, or they go back to the gaming world or the other world or the fintech spaces or the other worlds where this is very strongly inherited. So that's the other. So investment in people, investment in solutions, investing into ventures are key drivers for companies to change and to adopt all this. Sometimes when people invest, they ask, what is the ROI? That's what my leadership asks every day. What's the ROI of doing that? So sometimes you need to ask back to the leadership, what is the ROI of not doing this? Okay. If you don't do this, it has a significant cost for the business. And today, the leadership are willing to overlook that cost because a risk could come from any time, and when it comes, we'll manage. But you need to look at companies that are willing to look at that as a risk, and how do you de-risk that by investing into solutions that support that. Ultimately, it's for better growth and profitability for the business.
We've got only a couple more minutes, and I've got a number of other questions here, but what I'm going to do is open it up to the questions that are in the audience. Quite a bit of questions, so I can see that you folks are engaged. That's excellent. Thank you very much. A lot of the questions are on blockchain. So I'm going to just open this up for the panel, grab a mic. The questions are basically, how is blockchain, let me just pick one so it goes up there. So I'm going to just open this up for the panel, grab a mic.
Hopefully it does, right?
How is blockchain?
Go.
Let me just pick one so it goes up there.
All right, let's try it again.
So the basic question I had over here, and I don't know if it's showing in this one. There you go, up in the top, right? What could be ideal solution via blockchain to solve the problem, like to guarantee food quality or traceability or any, the supply chain? It's a broad topic. It's very large, right? But it's broad enough that we can make comments because we need to address something on blockchain. A lot of the audience are asking specifically on blockchain technology. Anybody?
So I can start. Once again, the topic itself is quite huge, but let me point out probably maybe 3 areas where blockchain could support in the food transparency and traceability. The first aspect is really understanding better the operational facilities where the food is coming from, be it if it is a boat for fish, be it a farm for feed, or be it factories. Understanding the labor situations there, forced labor, child labor, modern slavery, etc., that is happening in there. And that is very important because we all know what happened in Dhaka following the building collapse and how several companies had to shut down certain supply chains owing to that. So one is really looking at facilities and looking at what data could be captured through images or through IoTs or through sensors, and how that could be passed on, knowing that inherently that product is right. The second aspect is looking at it from a food volume perspective. So what comes in, what goes out across any of your suppliers. So for example, if you have rice, you might have the regular rice to which you could add basmati rice into it and sell it off as basmati rice, knowing that there's a portion of impurity which is a regular rice. So you know what is coming in, and the next person in the value chain knows what is coming out, and therefore knowing the difference would prevent the next person saying, I don't want to purchase this because it is corrupt. So looking at food volume is the second aspect of blockchain. The final thing is really on the IoT side or on the sensor side, looking at barcode or QR code or RFID. How do you tag individual products, even though food is a commodity as compared to a counterfeit Louis Vuitton or a Prada, it's very different. So here at least looking at certain types of key commodities and seeing how the IoT around those commodities can support the blockchain aspect. of it. A few examples, at least on the food waste side or food loss side, is how you can, for example, there's a retailer and they are procuring strawberries, and the strawberry needs to be transported to the various retail shops that they have. And looking at the colors of the strawberries inside those coolers in the trucks, you can redirect the strawberries, if it is already pretty ripe, to the closest retail shop than spending time going all the way down. So there are lots of things, and you spoke about how you can examine the health of the cattle or the pigs and so on. Similar technologies also exist from for egg-laying hens to look at the safety. Are they healthy enough? Are they roaming around enough? And therefore, trying to administer medications accordingly to get them back. So supporting food safety, nutrition, and food loss. So a few examples on three sides on blockchain.
Excellent. This question here, I'm putting it on that side of the room, both on the data privacy, custody of data, who owns the data, et cetera, as well as the context on, what is developed in China that transfers over here to Southeast Asia for you two folks. And then for the audience, we apologize on the mics. It sounds a little muffled, but that's a technology, and we're a technology company here. Let's address data. Who owns the data? When we build this stuff, and then let's look at from China what transfers over to our region.
Okay, I think that's a good question about use cases, and when you talk about data transfer between countries to countries, that's always an issue. And when we talk about data which could potentially affect national security and national reputation, like food quality, that becomes a greater problem as well. Now, in a very simple legal concept, whoever that the default position in the absence of any legal contracts governing the relationship otherwise is that data is typically owned by the person who generates it. So of course, if you have a human author, the human who make use of, let's say for example, you are a photographer, and in a very simple form, and you take a photo of someone. That someone whom is in the photo does not own the photo. You own the photo because you took the photo. So that's the basic legal position. Now, when we come to, however, legal contract, if I am the person in the photo and I commission you to take a photo of me, and we have a legal contract going on to say that that photo actually belongs to me, then it supersedes that default position. Okay, so a lot of things is actually governed by private contracts between parties. Now, at a national level, I think it will include a few different laws. Number one is international laws, and number two, it's the national laws governing, between the two countries. So there are laws on privacy, and I think Europe is very huge on that, personal data and even corporate data protection. And those things can come into effect and play. So the interaction is not so simple. There's no one clear answer that, yes, it belongs to China, or for example, it belongs to Southeast Asia. It really depends on the governing contract between the different parties. But in the event of dispute, then of course, what happens is that they can actually raise it up to the international tribunal, who would then decide on the case itself. Yeah, so I think that's in general.
Generally, how does China, do we see anything coming out of other countries? Do we see anything coming out of other countries? And of course, from the Alibaba's
Singapore
perspective, coming out of China that is being adopted here in Southeast Asia generally? What do you see?
Okay, I guess to address how transferable use cases from China to the rest of the world, I think it would be naive to also think that use cases within a country are transferable between companies. So from a data science perspective, right, we do see there's a lot of differences when it comes to even the similar types of projects between two different companies or even two different locations of the same company, because we have differences in the data sources, we have differences in the expectations of the people, we have differences in how they define the problem statements. But the main thing about this is that the methods used behind it, right? So of course there's some customization here and there, but the methods that the data scientist applies to these problems can be quite similar. It's just that it's not easy to say that I develop a model for a company in China, I can apply directly that model to a company in Indonesia. So that part is not going to be true for most situations, right? So from my perspective, how I see it is that anyway, there's going to be some customizations done. We would have to work more closely with the customers, and I think once you identify the three parts, I guess the three parts that are most important for most of my projects. The first is your problem statement, right? The second part is the business case for you, right? And the third part is what are the data sets that are available? Do we need to go and collect more data? So that affects the timelines of these projects.
We're about out of time here, so what I'd like to do is allow each of the panelists from this to provide at least, if they were going to leave you with one, piece of information or whatever, what would you say to the audience that you think would be relevant message, the key takeaway, elevator pitch, that you think the audience should know?
I think I will touch upon a comment, Isabel, and this is targeted more towards entrepreneurs who are planning to get into ag tech space. You just have to be patient in this industry for two reasons. One is the fact that it's seasonal. I mean, for any crop or any farm, the harvesting happens only for a few months in a given year. So you have to be patient, because as compared to other industries, generating data points in this industry takes a lot of time. Over the course of one season, you can only get up to 500, 600 data points. You have to work really hard to generate good enough training sets as far as self-learning algorithms are concerned. So it takes time. Secondly, in this industry, things just move at their own pace. And no offense to anybody, but whenever we deal with clients or other stakeholders, it just takes a hell lot of time. And then you can't outpace that.
On my side, first I would like to thank you for being here today. We are going to literally strip out a case on the 3rd of June. So the 3rd of June is the third edition, the first day of the third edition of Future Food Asia conference. So we have this case provided by Bulle, which is about food safety. I make it very short. You can have more information online. The essence of the case is we get thousands and thousands of food safety alerts every day. How can you tell the noise from the signal? How can you tell when it's a very serious alert and that should trigger a product recall? So on the 3rd of June, which is a Monday, we will literally strip out the case and present some winning solutions to, instead of talking, just show you how AI concretely can be applied, and to also show you the variety of approaches and solutions. So be welcome.
Especially for the ones who are representing the big companies out there, the blockchain AI on food is a long game topic. It could be a silver bullet, or it could be one of the many solutions that would address the food traceability and transparency issue that we currently have. So that's my thing. And even if you're not making money out of the projects that you are investing into currently on AI, on blockchain, there is also a market, and this is true especially for the big business, can't say the same for startups, is that you could be seen as an innovator by your clients by venturing into that space as a first mover advantage, or even as a second mover advantage in that space. So even if you don't make money on those projects necessarily today, and you could make money on that in the future, but today you could make money from the market itself when you present yourself as an innovator in that space, because then the clients want to work with you knowing that you are at the advent of this system. So that's how you can balance out that equation. Like I said, it's for big companies. For startups, you need to make money already. Thank you.
Okay, so address to two different groups of folks. I guess for the business owners, if you own a farm, my advice is to start collecting as much data as you can, because what I see when it comes to these sort of things is that the company that has the most data basically is going to be leading the transformation to the next phase, right? So sensors, camera, pictures, videos, things like that. Of course, if it's hosted on Alibaba Cloud, it's better. So, but I mean, just collect. You want to burn it to CDs is your thing, right? So just do what you do, right? So for the companies, there are startups that are interested in this space, right? So there's a lack of data sets, but of course that's where we pitch the AI challenge. That's if you want data sets, you want a clearly defined problem statement, which as a data scientist, there's no such thing. It's always show me something, right? Tell me something. So this is a clearly defined problem statement. This has a bunch of data that you can look into, but this is more of the processing side of food processing side of the house, but it's still interesting. So just get started. Yep.
I think at some point in time, especially for startups, you would be thinking about protecting your idea and protecting your invention. And I think one of the greatest challenge for startups in this field is that you need to recognize that it's a multidisciplinary field. That of course, when we talk about AI, it's usually the domain, in the domain of data scientists. But when we talk about farming and agriculture, it's in the domain of farmers altogether. So you need people of different knowledge to come together. I think if you're looking to file for intellectual property protection for your inventions or for your, AI-related technology, think of it not just in very narrow terms like patents or copyright or trade secret. Think of it as a broad, think of those as tools, as different types of tools to protect different parts of your invention. So what do I mean by this? For example, when we talk about AI-related and AI application in food or agriculture, some people would go down into the actual workings of the AI engine itself. Now, however, when we try to file a patent, we want to go as broad as possible. We typically do not limit it to the actual algorithm. We want to get the modeling right. We want to protect your whole application at a very broad level. So we try not to go down into that particular engine. I mean, you may have, for example, a neural network with 4 hidden layers and things like that, but we don't go down into that level of detail. We try to have it, okay, neural network, full stop, and that's it. So think about that when you are thinking of protecting your IP. Thank you.
I got it. So we're going to have a little networking. At least for each of the panelists, there were at least 2 questions that went on. We got a lot of questions from you folks. So feel free to engage with each of the panelists. We've got about 30 minutes of networking right after the session. I'd like to thank everybody in the panel and for the audience. Hopefully this time was well spent and gave you some information on the agri-tech space and the food tech space. Thank you very much.